Hello, I'm Suzanne McAllister. Welcome to Full Circle. You know, many of us realize that many African folk tales tell very powerful stories. Well, coming up in our music segment today, we have two up-and-coming singers who will perform an African folk tale. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce two powerful women who also have a tale of their own, and their lives came together in West Africa in the nation of Sierra Leone. Joining me now, I have missionary and author of the book Unexpected Destiny, Pat Estes, and her adoptive daughter, Suzanne Kamara from Sierra Leone. It's a pleasure to have you both here.
Thank you for having us.
So, Pat, you had been in Sierra Leone as a missionary, and 7 years into your stay there with your husband, also a missionary, you had an unexpected event happen in your life. Tell me, after that 7 years being there, how suddenly something changed your life.
Well, a missionary colleague of ours was coming to our home because there was like a women's retreat for women all across Sierra Leone. And she was bringing the women from her village and coming to stay with us. And I met her as she drove her Mazda truck down our long rocky driveway. And she handed me a baby. And the baby was now newborn size, 5 weeks old, white skin, blonde hair. And I remember her saying, she doesn't remember this way, but I remember her saying, "She's yours if you want her." Well, I wanted her. I definitely wanted her. We had been married 16 years. In fact, she was born on our 16th wedding anniversary, and I never got over wanting a child. And so to me, it was no problem. Sure, yes, we'll take her.
And now here she is, many years later, that beautiful baby of yours. Suzanne, have you ever wondered what your life would be like, you know, as an adult when you look back, what it would have been like had you not been placed in the hands of Pat?
Well, I kind of got the opportunity to see when I went back to my village what it might have been like. And I certainly would have had a struggle physically, and even had I survived, it would have just been really a tough time, you know, psychologically more and physically than what I had.
Well, and you mentioned had you survived. Pat, bring us up to speed on the situation with Suzanne's birth mother.
Well, the mother died just after giving birth to twins, and Susie was about 3.5 pounds. Her little brother was even smaller. And so the missionaries were willing to help until the family made a plan, took the little babies, tried to keep them warm. One interesting thing was that they put the little boy, I believe, Susie's brother, in the oven with a pilot light on to keep him warm. And she ended up with the name Baby Cakes for a year. After a year, I said, that's enough, Baby Cakes. But the little boy only survived for 1 day, and Susie began to thrive.
You know, I hear stories of people that have been a twin, and even though they may not have lived with a twin, they still feel like they are missing a little part of them. Do you have that yearning or feeling at all?
I think I always did feel like, you know, it would have been nice to have another twin, you know, with me to share things with, special moments with.
Well, your book is so wonderful. You go into all of these details and the multicultural issues that you have. And Pat, you also talk very openly about the fact that Suzanne is an albino. And you mention in the book that that is bad luck in some people's mind in Sierra Leone. How did you overcome that as you were raising Suzanne so that she felt to be the most beautiful person that she is?
Well, I didn't overcome it as much as we would have loved to have overcome it. We showered our love on her. We told her her story. We told her that God placed her in our family, and we were so blessed to have her. We lived those kinds of statements, and yet the fact that some children and some adults would comment that she looked different. I remember a woman asking me, "What is she?" And I so wish I had said, a lovely little girl, what are you? But I didn't.
And even in the book, Suzanne, you say, I'm not Black, I'm not American. And you were really challenging your own self-identity, weren't you?
Mm-hmm. I was. It was such a struggle for me because, you know, most people that I knew, they knew exactly who they were and where they fit, and I didn't.
Well, we are going to take a break and we will find out about that life journey and that unexpected destiny. Don't go away, we're back after this. Welcome back to Full Circle, where we are talking about the book Unexpected Destiny with the author of the book, Pat Estes, and her adoptive daughter from Sierra Leone. So we left off with the fact that you were struggling with some identity issues, but now let's bring it forward. You came back to the United States. Suzanne's had a loving home, but still struggling, and you had to make a very serious decision in terms of her schooling.
When she was a young teenager, it seemed to come to a head that just she didn't care about much of anything. She didn't know, as she has said, what her identity was. She had a real identity crisis. She was trying to figure all of it out, but we had her with a Christian counselor, an expert in teen issues, and he could not reach her. And I don't know, maybe she can comment on what the reason was for that.
Yeah, I'd love to get Suzanne's perspective. We all know that every teenager goes through that, but for you, you had some special issues. How did you go through that?
Well, for me, it was more just anger. I was just really angry at the world, angry at, you know, anything that was a form of authority. And so my way of acting out was to do direct opposite of what everyone else wanted me to do. And I just kind of was like, you know, I'm so mad at God for making me the way he did. And so I was dabbling in a lot of occultic things. And so that really impressed my attitude.
But there was a real change of heart over time, wasn't there, Pat, in your daughter?
Yes, there was. The counselor suggested that we send her to residential treatment, which was agony for all of us. And yet, after almost 2 years of staying at Shelterwood in Branson, Missouri, she found a lot of help there. Now, you wouldn't say that everything is solved all of a sudden, but she found help and she made a new commitment to God and was on her way to healing.
And part of that healing for you, Suzanne, was to go visit relatives in Sierra Leone, to visit relatives in Philadelphia. And there was a man who took a special notice of you over in your village. Tell me about a person who is now your husband, who you had not met before you married.
Well, we were in Freetown when I was doing my roots trip, and our driver happened to be late picking us up. So my husband now happened to be around the same area that we were in. And so when the driver finally came and took us to my village, Ansu, my husband, saw us driving by, and I caught his eye, I guess. So he asked his friend, like, who is that? And his friend said, you know, that's the baby that the missionaries took after her mom died. So he just contacted the family who I was in contact with in Philadelphia.
And it was years before he was able to get his visa and
Right.
finally come here. But you had a very traditional wedding ceremony, didn't you?
Yes. Yes. After the engagement, which was traditionally Sierra Leonean, we did an American wedding as well.
Oh, that's fabulous.
So.
Well, we are almost out of time. I know that our audience at home is going to want to learn more about your story. The book is called Unexpected Destiny, and our guests today, authors Pat Estes and her daughter Suzanne Kamara. Thank you so much, and you have been blessed by a new little boy and a new little grandson
Yes,
as well.
sure.
So any parting thoughts, Pat, just very briefly, for a parent who may be struggling with some of these very same issues with their own child?
I feel like the story is really about God's hand on our lives and on her life. And we need to put our lives into His hands. He has the answers, and many times we don't have the answers, but He knows how to lead us, which I think is what the book is all about.
Well, I read every page of it. It's a fascinating story. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Now, when we come back, we are going to talk a little bit more about multicultural awareness and some of the issues that go along with that. Stay with us. We are back, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Assistant Director of the Multicultural Center at IUPUI. Her name is Chris Medrano, and I am so thrilled to have you here because you can really expand on the story that we heard about in the previous segments about unexpected destiny and a young child who was adopted by a missionary family, came to the United States from Sierra Leone, and Suzanne Camara expressed some of the frustrations that she had growing up not fitting in. How does that play into some of the things that you do at the center and messages that you want to bring to people that seek your advice?
Well, I think it's very interesting because we have these types of programs and workshops all the time. We talk a lot about cultural identity development or identity development overall. A lot of people think that only people of color have a cultural identity development. That's not the case. Really, a lot of people and everybody should have some sort of cultural identity development. Whether you're of European background or African American background or Latino or Asian or you name it, we all have some sort of culture and identity that comes as a result of that. And so as part of the center, the Multicultural Center at IUPUI, we have a lot of conversations that address those issues of intersections of identity. And so some of the things that Suzanne was addressing in reference to, coming here as a young child and then acting up when she was a teenager and how angry she was, could have probably had a lot to do with the feeling that she didn't know where she belonged. So,
right.
We had a little bit of off-camera conversation about not feeling how you belong. And, coming from an African country, from Sierra Leone, also struggling with issues or, identity conflicts that had to do with her albinism, being what you would consider in the United States African American. Granted, she came to the United States as a very small child at 3. So she grew up around other, African American kids, and so how do they define what does it mean to be African American, especially when we start defining identity or placing labels on what identity is because of your external appearance. So if you're African American, if you're Black, clearly you're not supposed to look white. So that causes some cognitive dissonance or conflict of understanding. These things don't connect. When things don't connect, others can tend to act up, and cause bullying.
Sure.
Exactly. And so because they don't have a thorough understanding of what this is or why people look this way. But then again, kids get bullied all the time, not suffering from albinism or having albinism. And so those are things that I think are really important in the development of Suzanne's identity, because she was struggling with that, and also being from a foreign country. I'm from a foreign country. I get called an immigrant all the time. I'm of Latino descent. I can also understand what it means to be part of a family, that you're adopted into a family, but yet, even though you were loved and treated wonderfully, you kind of don't always fit in, especially if you come from a totally different racial makeup than what the family looks like.
Sure, and any teenager goes through those things, but when you add layer upon layer upon layer, then you
Yes.
really do have these very frustrating things. And one of those layers is certainly the whole issue of how society perceives beauty, how
Exactly.
society defines certain aspects of our life.
Exactly.
Speak to that.
So in African American culture, which we would perceive Suzanne is, even though she's clearly from Africa, but was raised with African American environment here in the United States, issues of colorism are very important. And issues of hair are very important. Those are two huge identity development pieces in the African American community. A lot of aspects of privilege come as a result of colorism.
Define what you mean by aspects of privilege.
Okay, so in reference to colorism and hair, a lot of people can perceive that the fairer skin you have also brings in elements of better type of hair or less coarse hair. So more fine hair, that blows in the wind when, there's something out there, And so aspects of privilege, a lot of people, and we always blame the media. It's not always the media. The media does influence, but it's not always the media because, it goes back, it's a historical component, right? And I can touch a little bit on that, on what privilege means and how that's connected, is because during times of slavery in the United States, there was a difference between house slaves and field slaves. And so usually house slaves were products of interracial or abuse, right, of slave masters raping, their women, their female slaves. And so because of the connection that they had, the offspring that would come off of those slaves were then given a special privilege and worked in homes, in the houses, inside the plantations, not necessarily in the fields. Because they were interracial, they brought in finer features, weren't as pure, if you will, African slaves. And so that contributes to the privilege that house slaves had over field slaves. And so historically that kind of lingers a little bit, and people that are fairer skin, better hair, finer features are for the most part treated better and have a little bit more privilege because of their physical appearance as a result of that.
Well, there is so much a part of
Yes.
this whole issue of multicultural awareness. I hope our discussion today has made you more aware. I'd like to thank our guest, Chris Medrano, for sharing her insight into this whole issue. Now, don't go away. When we come back, we have that African folklore tale performed by Ian and Eric next.
Stay tuned. Musical Showcase is coming up next. And now, here's our Musical Showcase.
Welcome back. It is my pleasure to introduce two rising stars to the program. Joining me now, we have Ian Bossing and also Eric Wiegand. They have just completed their debut cabaret show, and they are here to perform for us today. But they have been performing most of their lives. Welcome to the program, guys.
Thank you.
I'm really glad you're here. So Ian, tell me a little bit about the cabaret show that you just completed.
All right, well, the cabaret show is called Other People's Stories, and really what we're trying to do was just take some of the modern musical theater songs and tell them through our lens. So it was a really cool debut duo performance that we were able to complete.
Well, that's an exciting thing, especially as you head off to college. And also, Eric, I know you're going to perform a song today, so tell me a little bit about the song Dinks.
Yeah, it's called Dink's Song. It was around the beginning of the 20th century that it was made, although the origins are kind of nebulous, it's not really sure, but the story goes that it was an African-American woman named Dink whose husband left her, and she would sing this song, and it was sung by folk singers for the rest of the century, like Bob Dylan and others in the 60s, yeah.
All right, well, we are privileged to have that song being performed right here on Full Circle. I'm Suzanne McAllister, and I'll see you next time, Full Circle.
If I just like Noah's dove, I'd fly the river to the one I love. Fare thee well, my honey, fare thee well. I had a man who was long and tall. He moved his body like a cannonball. Fare thee well, my honey, fare thee well. I remember one evening in the pouring rain, and in my heart was an aching pain. Fare thee well, my honey, fare thee well. Muddy river runs muddy and wide, can't give a bloody for an unborn child. Fare thee well, my honey, fare thee well. Just as sure as the bird flies high above, life ain't worth living without the one you love. Fare thee well,